It's time to get better at PvP together once again. Today we will talk about a pretty undervalued part of PvP, which is inspecting, gathering as much information as you can about your enemy as quickly as you can in order to make the best possible tactical decisions in your fights. We need to talk about the single biggest inspecting mistake that you are probably making as well, and then later we'll talk about some smaller tips on top of that. Okay, the single biggest thing that you can learn to save you a lot of time and pain in Albion PvP when it comes to inspecting your enemies specifically, the single biggest thing is that average IP is garbage. This is a number that is there just to bait you, and the sooner you can train your brain not to look at it and look at some other things that we will discuss, the sooner you will get into good habits and you will start getting good information from your opponents to base your decisions in the fight on. Let's talk first about why this number is garbage, then about what kind of problems it actively creates for most of us in our PvP fights, and then thirdly, let's talk about some solutions to this, to what to look at or what to do instead of looking at this number. So first of all, why I say that average IP is not a good number and not something to look at when you're inspecting an enemy. Well, first of all, of course, when you're completely new, this is pretty much the only choice you have, because there's way too much information when you inspect someone and it takes a bit of time to get used to actually taking that information in. So at having one single number represent how strong your opponent is, although wildly incorrect, can still be somewhat useful if you're, your first couple days or first couple of weeks in Albion PvP. But as soon as possible, you should move on from this. And the reason why it becomes very bad very quickly is because average IP is simply the average of the IP that your opponent has in these 6 item slots. However, these 6 slots are absolutely not equal. Some of them have a lot bigger impact on how strong you or your opponent will actually be. And a very good example, a very extreme but good example of this is equipping a cape. If I were to equip a cape in this example here to go with my tier 7 build, I would raise my average IP by 167. This is as opposed to this build, which I commonly use as well, which does not have a cape. 167 more average IP. If instead I was to upgrade my weapon by 5 full tiers and upgrade my chest armor by another 5 full tiers, I would get the same result, the same kind of average IP boost. But I'm hoping that you can easily understand how much stronger I would be if I were to fight against you, for example, with 5 tiers higher weapon and chest armor but without a cape, as opposed to just simply equipping a tier 7 Avalonian cape, for example. This is extreme, but it is relevant. However, we can go a little bit less extreme with our example and check out this Bloodletter build here. Here we're not talking about having a cape or not, but look at his helmet. He's upgraded his helmet to 8.1, while his Stalker jacket, which is probably the most important and impactful item in the Bloodletter build, the Stalker jacket is only tier 7. He upgraded his boots and the rest of his items to tier 8, his Bloodletter is awakened. All of these things together combine for him having 1440 IP. We're gonna look at this fight against this player in just a second, but consider that if instead of this he had his helmet at tier 7 and his Stalker jacket 8.1, he would be much stronger, but he would have the exact same average IP. And the mists are full of these kind of examples, and in a moment I'll get to the solution or how you can navigate this, but let's look at the kind of problems that focusing on average IP creates for most of us in the mists. So the first big problem is that you use this information to choose what fight to take, and well, if you're looking at the wrong information, you're gonna take wrong fights. So in this Abbey, when me and this Bloodletter saw each other, he saw that he has 300 IP advantage over me. I'm using the no cape build that we just discussed earlier. So he decides to take this fight, and this in and of itself is not a mistake, he can definitely win this fight if he plays very well. But then the second problem comes in. If you look too much at average IP, which is what kind of decisions you make once you are in the fight. And in this fight, this Bloodletter clearly is taking very aggressive options because he's approaching this fight as if he had a clear IP advantage, which is not the case, especially after I overcharge, which by the way might have been somewhat questionable from my part, but especially after I do that, he's not only not in an advantageous position, but he actually should be very careful. It's not that difficult for me to kill him. My weapon is same tier as his Awakened Bloodletter, my chest piece is tier 8, and his IP advantage comes from not very relevant things. And you can see that the fight is over and I have more than 40% of HP when it all ends. So this Bloodletter perhaps took a correct fight, but the way he approached the fight, I believe, was completely wrong because he was blinded by this IP advantage, which is not a good number to base your decisions on. And final problem coming from looking too much at this is that once you do get into a fight and you make whatever mistakes you make, then you can end up with completely wrong lessons. Now, this is not the fight on screen, unfortunately. This is an old situation I couldn't find the recording of, but I remember a fight I had back on the Western server against another spear. I was tier 8 and he was tier 7, and he attacked me in the camp. He had higher IP because he had a cape, and I believe his boots were ridiculously high anyway. He made some of those IP mistakes, let's say, so his average IP was higher, he thought he was stronger. He attacked me, I was on Cripple, he was on Impaler. I would have preferred to switch to Impaler, but I didn't have time, and I beat him primarily because of my IP advantage. In fact, he played pretty well and it was a close fight. And after the fight he wrote to me, "Damn, Cripple's so strong." And this conclusion that he made was wildly incorrect. I believe that Impaler is better for most spear versus spear matchups, and specifically in that fight, he actually played it well, and his Impaler was a big reason why the fight was so close. But I beat him with my IP advantage, which he did not realize that I had. So he took away a completely wrong lesson from that fight, thinking that he lost because of our W difference. Be careful about not making the same mistake. Enough about problems. I hope that you're convinced that average IP is a garbage number which you should not look at if you can, and let's instead now focus on what to look at instead, or what you should first prioritize seeing when you open the inspect menu or the inspect window. I suggest that the first place where you train your eyes to go when you open this is these two item slots. Check out your opponent's weapon and chest armor. These are by far the most influential two items, especially when we are talking about how strong or powerful your opponent is, and not just trying to figure out what their exact build is. Now, once you look at these two items, you want to quickly figure out what tier those items are and what spec your opponent has. So in this example, I could quickly decide this opponent is using tier 6 carving and tier 7 assassin jacket with full specs. Some players will fill all their item slots with the same tier items. Some players will upgrade certain item slots above others. They will make decisions based on their finances or whatever build they want to go for. All of those things are awesome, but looking at these two slots, the weapon and chest armor, right away will give you the most correct information as quickly as possible to gauge how strong your opponent is, so that you can start making better decisions in the mists. This is almost difficult to admit, but I still sometimes struggle with this a little bit, because especially when I'm lazy or when I'm tired, because when I started Albion, I really got into a habit of looking and prioritizing average IP. Luckily, I learned later that this was not a good strategy, but that habit still lives somewhere deep inside me sometimes, so the quicker you can transition out of it, the better it will be for you. From now on, as much as you can, think of your opponents not as 1400 IP carving sword, for example, but think of them as 4463 carving with full specs. So 44 referring to the weapon, 63 to their armor, and then full specs or no specs or whatever you see. The little added benefit of this is that as you're looking at their specs, you will already have a bit of an idea whether your opponent is an experienced player with the set that they're playing or whether they're just learning it. Because if someone has no specs, it's likely that they're not going to be as good at knowing the matchups and the strategies and all those things with their weapon. There is just one small caveat to add that you might need to think about, is that certain items which require artifacts to craft start with a little bit higher IP. So if you see someone with a tier 7 jacket of tenacity, you should know that means this opponent is stronger than someone with a tier 7 assassin jacket. I'm about to inspect the player that is mounted on this screen. Tell me what you can about him. I'll even freeze it for a second. So, did your brain instantly look at the average IP, or can you correctly tell me that this is a tier 7 dual swords with a tier 7 jacket that has overcharged his items and is about half or a bit over half specs? Now, on top of this one huge thing that we have been discussing so far in this video, there's 2 more tips I want to give you about inspecting people which have helped me. But before that, let's just very generally discuss inspecting as a skill. The thing is, being good at inspecting is definitely a skill in Albion Online, because absorbing the information that you have available to you in order to then be able to make decisions based on good information is crucial. It's important, and it's something you can do well or badly. However, I don't think you should focus too much on this, other than watching this video perhaps and thinking about what we've been talking about. There's 3 general things which will make you better at inspecting, and you don't need to focus on them specifically for inspecting's sake. There are things that are good for your PvP progress anyway. Number 1 is learning different builds. Inevitably, the more you know about different mists builds, different items that people commonly take into the mists and use and that are popular, the faster you will be at inspecting and getting information. Because if you see a build like this carving I was fighting earlier, that you've seen this build 100 times, you will instantly know what to look out for and what that build most likely will do. Number 2, the method that you can get better at inspecting is just to inspect everyone, which is once again a very good approach to missed PvP and something you should probably be doing anyway. Anyone you see on your screen ever, during a fight, before a fight, while you're mounted or dismounted, whatever role you're in, just inspect them, and that's it. Even if you don't know why or what to do with this information, just inspect everybody. And finally, if you are able to record and review some of your PvP fights or PvP situations, then that's an awesome way to get better at PvP. And one of the things to look out for when you're doing that is just to see what kind of information was available to you about your opponent in the fight. So when you're reviewing your own fight, just pay attention to what build your opponent has. Maybe they're doing the thing that I was doing earlier when I don't have a cape. Maybe their IP was inflated by some wrong decisions they've made with their build, whatever. Just take a moment to think about that if you are reviewing your fights. Okay, so we have covered the single most important thing that will make your inspecting so much better and give you an advantage in PvP, which is to start ignoring average IP and start focusing on the tier and specs of your opponent's weapon and chest armor. After that, we've quickly discussed the steps to getting better at PvP and specifically to getting better at inspecting. Now there's 2 more tips, so to speak, that I want to give you that have helped me over time to become better at this specific part of PvP. And those are as follows. Number 1, bind your inspecting key to something else than Y. Maybe your hands are built different, so figure it out for yourself, but for me, Y was incredibly uncomfortable to use because it's kind of far and I have to put my hand in a specific way, or it's more difficult to use it in the middle of a fight. I'm using the key which is V, which is still a bit far, but it's kind of close and it's easy to press while I'm ready to press all my buttons and all my other spells. If you can figure out something even more convenient than V, even better for you. If you have not played Albion for years yet, it's a good time for you to develop the habit of a different hotkey which is closer to your other important spells. Inspecting should not be something you need to specifically think about, but it should be your second nature all the time when you are in the mists. And the final thing that has helped me that might also be a good idea for you is almost forcing myself at some point to constantly inspect my opponents during a fight. Now, if you're still getting used to PvP, there might be other more important things for you to focus on, like remembering to use all your spells and potions and things like that. But at some point, I believe it's a good idea to keep inspecting your opponent almost forcefully. For example, every time when there's a kiting phase in the fight, you can take the chance just to click that key and look at his build quickly once again, and every time you will pick up on some little detail more than you did last time. So for example, one thing that I often don't really pay attention to until midway to the fight is what cape my opponent has. Well, if they have Avalonian or Thetford, you will visually see it very obviously, but if they have like Martlock cape or Undead cape or maybe no cape at all, then that's not a priority from my first inspect if I don't have time to look at everything. However, as you inspect your opponent more and more during a fight, you get used to this idea that you don't need to figure everything out right away, but you first of all look at the most important things, which after this video you should know are the weapon and chest piece. Then of course you will take some time to try to figure out what spells they have or what kind of boots or helmet spells they're using. But then you inspect more and more, so you also look at their cape. Maybe you will see if they're using some different food or some different potion from regular. All those things, you don't have to absorb all of that at once. You can give yourself time, and you can first of all look at something and then inspect your opponent again during a fight to look at something else, and make it into a habit of inspecting all the people you fight against more than once. So there we go. I'm gonna end this little ramble here. We've covered the things that have been immensely helpful to me as I've become better and better at this specific aspect of PvP. Hopefully this has been very useful to you as well. Good luck out there. Don't forget to enjoy your life, enjoy PvP in Albion Online, and of course don't forget to like this video. See ya!